are thrilled to officially open the regular season of talks with artist Sanford Biggers. And I want to thank our partners for their support of today's program, the Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit, or MOCAD, and the University of Michigan Museum of Art and Michigan Radio 91.7 FM. Always aiming for a deeper immersive experience for all of you out there, Sanford's work just happens to currently be on view just down the road in Detroit at the Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit, which is hosting a solo exhibition aptly named Subjective Cosmologies, now through January 1st. So if you didn't see it, it just opened this past weekend. If you didn't see it then, you have till January 1. Don't miss it. You can also meet him today if you join us. We will have a Q&A directly following the talk in here, which will be in the screening room, the other theater in the theater, which if you exit this room and go left down the hallway, you'll find yourself in another theater lobby, and that is the screening room. I've one hot tip for you today. A very recent graduate of the Stamp School, Levester Williams. He has an exhibition which is now on display at the Institute for Humanities Gallery, which is just around the corner, at the corner of Washington and Thayer. And it just so happens he has an opening reception for that exhibition happening today, directly following the lecture. So you can stop by there and take that in. And before we take off today, I wanted to give you a few thoughts on our season theme, seed, which we have visually represented here with what has been cut off, of course, from this picture, but is prominently displayed in most of our graphics, which is a nebula, or the birth of a star. Now, simply put, a seed holds potential, but alone, it's just nothing more than a seed. It has to be activated by just the right elements for its potential to be realized. So the speaker series here is the seedbed of ideas for you, and you, the Penny Stamps community, carry the potential of activation to foster the growth of the creative ideas which are presented. For a seed fully activated supersedes itself and produces more seeds, just as one idea begets another. And now, the most fun part that I found out when thinking about seed, which is in the Dictionary of Slang, and though I don't advise its usage, seed, past tense for see, as in a view of the past, such as when you look at the stars, you can say, I seed it. I seed that celestial canopy. As you are literally looking back in time, when you look at the stars, you're looking through light years of the past. Stars, too, are generated from seeds of light, which require activation through intense pressures forcing an active fusion. So I hope that this season, there will be many acts of fusion created from the interface of ideas released here on this stage and activated by the forces of your fertile minds. And very fitting today, we begin with Subjective Cosmology and Sanford Biggers, who is himself a master of fusion, as you will discover. And with us to give him a proper introduction, please welcome Executive Director of the Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit, or MOCAD, Alicia Borowy-Reeder.
Hello, everybody. It's great to see everyone. How many of you have been to MOCAD? Can I see your hands? All right. Well, this is going to give you a great reason to come and see us. I am so excited to introduce Sanford Biggers. MOCAD is turning 10 years old, and I'm filled with pride with our pioneering history, as well as our role in the local, national, and international art worlds. MOCAD's mission is to support the vanguard of contemporary art, and Sanford Biggers exemplifies all of our hard work for the past 10 years. In a community that has struggled with decline, social, economic, and political, many of the issues in Sanford's work are particularly relevant. He is an artist educator. He works full-time as a professor at Columbia University. His work is held in major museum collections. He is represented by Monique Molos in Chicago, as well as Massimo De Carlo in Europe. In bringing to light such issues, his work helps address problems that cross-pollinate cultures that are present on both local and international, national levels. Sanford has an expansive studio practice that includes performance, This project at MoCAD was born out of a need to experiment and to engage with the community differently. Moon Medicin, which is Sanford's performance group, is a multimedia concept band, and he performed at the opening of MoCAD inside the gallery. Sanford's cross-disciplinary approach uses film, sculpture, performance. He knows no limits. His choice of medium is driven by his ideas. He is thought-provoking, he is challenging, his work is nuanced with interpretations of the world around us. He references art history, music, culture in all kinds of exciting and complex ways. Please welcome Sanford Biggers.
What's up? What's up? What's up? Good afternoon. How is everyone today? Welcome back to school. First of all, I'd like to thank Elisa. I want to thank Christina, and I want to thank Penny Stamps for having me here this afternoon. And I have a lot to show you, so I'm going to jump into it fairly quickly. Just a little background, logistical stuff. I was born in Los Angeles, but I live in New York. I've been there for several years. But in the interim, I've lived in Atlanta, Baltimore, Chicago, Warsaw, Budapest, Nagoya, Japan, Berlin, Germany, Salvador de Bahia, Brazil, for stints here and there, usually from anywhere from 3 months to 2 or 3 years. And you'll see a lot of those ideas represented in the work I'm going to show you. But before we get into that, I want to sort of open your minds a bit, get you a little bit more ready for some of the artwork that I create. So I created this mind mapping to give you some insight to some of the ideas and some of the themes that I draw from in my work. So please take a look.
The unknown is eternal because you will never know what it is all about.
The unknown is eternal because you will never know what it is all about.
Your wisdom will be when you say, I do not know.
Your wisdom will be when you say, I do not know.
Your ignorance will be your salvation.
Your ignorance will be your salvation.
There is a fifth dimension, beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call
One moment, please. Ooh.
I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. It's a depression. Everybody's out of work or scared of losing their job. The dollar buys a nickel's worth. Banks are going bust. Shopkeepers keep a gun under the counter. Punks are running wild in the street, and there's nobody anywhere who seems to know what to do, and there's no end to it. We know the air is unfit to breathe, and our food is unfit to eat. We sit watching our TVs while some local newscaster tells us that today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living rooms. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to get mad. I don't want you to protest. I don't want you to riot. I don't want you to write to your congressman because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crime in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it. My life has value. So, I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. I want you to get up right now. Get up, go to your windows, open them, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. Then we'll figure out what to do. But first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. Then we'll figure out what to do. But first, you've got to get mad. You've got to get angry. You've got to go out and say, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. Then we'll figure it out. First, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being, God damn it. I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
Cousins, I want you all to go to your windows.
Open them up.
Go to your windows and yell out, I'm tired of the drugs. I'm tired of the crack babies born out of wedlock to crackhead aid-infested parents. I'm tired of the inflated welfare rolls while good wholesome Americans bring less and less of their paycheck home every 2 weeks.
And that's a long time, too.
I'm tired. You're tired. We're all tired of all these so-called Bible thumping,
Swing down, swing low.
God-fearing,
GP, are you with me?
whore-moggling, professional athletes.
You's a fine motherfucker, baby. Back that ass up.
Cousins, I want you to go to your windows. Yell out. Scream with all the life you can muster up inside your bruised and battered, assaulted bodies. I'm sick and tired of niggas, and I'm not gonna take it anymore!
That boy something else. Once he get to talking, Lord have mercy, he done did it again.
Today's the beginning of Black History Week.
Well, Sweet Daddy Williams is black.
But you should be painting someone more relevant to Black history.
Relevant? Are you jiving?
Figure 8 is double 4. at the Yale Howard game. Girl, I saw your beaver flash. I'll never be the same. Oh no.
You gave me a soul kiss. Boy, it sure was grand. You gave me a dry hump behind the hot dog stand. Oh, yeah.
I used to have pimples, but I made them disappear.
He faced life with face off. It made his skin so clear.
Don't get what you may say, we got that attitude. Don't get what you may do, we got that attitude. We got that BMA. We got that BMA. Don't get what you may think, we got that attitude. Get what you may do, we got that attitude. We got that BMA. We got that BMA. Don't get what you may think, we got that attitude. Don't get what you may do, we got that attitude.
Okay. Now that we're all warmed up, all I can say about that is it's complicated. So I'm going to show some images that I haven't shown in a really long time. And this has come up because of the recent show, Subjective Cosmology, that just opened in Detroit at MoCAD last week. And as an artist, you know, working over multiple decades at this point, you realize how far and how close you remain to some of your earlier works. And it's interesting to see how that plays out over, you know, several years. And one theme that's always been very interesting to me is history. And I have a sense that history is malleable because every year, every few years, we find some historical fact that is debunked. Historians are refuted. Ideas go back and forth over millennia just to find out that what we believed, like the earth is flat, turns out not to be the case. With that in mind, as an artist, that becomes very fertile ground to make work. So a few years ago, and I'll start here, I was invited to be in a show at the Princeton University Museum of Art. And this is an encyclopedic museum. It has work from all periods since they've been collecting and from all over the world. And 3 artists were invited, Ai Weiwei, Ellen Harvey, and myself, to do interventions in the museum so we could borrow work from there and create work based on it or reorganize their collection. So I chose to work in the pre-Columbian section, the Renaissance, African, and Greco-Roman sections. So this is an example of a piece that I had in the pre-Columbian section. Are many of you familiar with the Olmec heads, or the heads from the Olmec culture? Okay, so this is a perfect example. The Olmec were a society that existed somewhere between 400 and 1200 BC. And they were known, some of the artworks or the landmarks that are known from that culture are these monolithic headstones that stand anywhere from 8 to 16 feet tall and are massive blocks, boulders that are carved with these facial features. And historians have debated for years whether these were descendants of Inuit cultures that came over during Pangaea when, you know, all the land masses were together, or came across the Bering Strait. And then there's another camp that says these might be descendants of early African navigators who were sailing off the coast of Western Africa but would be caught in tidal currents and sirocco's and gusts of wind that would bring them over to Mexico. And hence, the cultures merged and these icons were made. So with that in mind, in the pre-Columbian section, there was this old maquette up top. Let's see if this thing works. Oh, yeah, there you go. And there was this dagger with a fist on it, and that was from around 600 BC. So I thought, if these guys really came from Africa and they had these afros, there had to be a way to comb them out. So I made combs with an afro pick with a fist on it, reminiscent of the kind you might see from the late 60s, early 70s during the civil rights era. I carved it in an indigenous wood to that region and carved it in a way that looked like it could have been made at that same time. Next to it, I created my own museum text that explains exactly what I just told you. And the idea, this type of intervention is a way of rewriting history. And when I say writing, I obviously mean R-I-G-H-T-I-N-G as opposed to scribing. So close up. And soon after, also sort of riffing off of African cultures and various artifacts from societies in Africa, I started to make my own versions of Nkisi. Nkisi, I'm sure many of you have seen them in museums. They're usually wooden figures with nails and shards and pieces of glass stuck in them. And the idea is that they ward off evil spirits. So as a community gets ready for an event, everybody walks by the sculpture and hammers a nail into it. And that shows the communal strength. So I started to do that, and once again, wards off evil spirits. So while I was dumpster diving one day, I came across this old book called The Hangman's House. And thinking of the history of the US as being a hangman's house, where there were so many lynchings during the Jim Crow era and the Reconstruction era, and now they're starting to talk about that in terms of terrorism. But when I made this piece, I was thinking, is there a way to alleviate that memory, the gravity of that history? So I started to make my own Nkisi with this particular book. Now, the book has nothing to do with what I've just told you. It's the title that really struck me, and it's the aesthetic that added to the ability to make this some type of artifact. So in the 90s, I lived in Japan for 3 years, and I became enamored with the culture, Japanese language, Buddhism, Shintoism, and the artworks from those eras. So coming back to the States, I wanted to make work that I felt was autobiographical in some sense. So I started to go to different stores and pick up items, and I found these plastic Buddhas. And underneath the Buddha was a clear acrylic gel that had embedded four-leaf clovers, horseshoes, pieces of rice, things that have nothing to do with Buddhism, have nothing to do with Japan, but are good luck items. And then I looked closer to see that they were all made in Mexico. So I started to, I became really interested in the fact that there was no real origin for this icon and that it was almost ahistoric. And it was in one way, it was a snapshot of globalism and also cultural appropriation. But I started to take these and cast other Buddhas out of them and then wrap them, mummify them actually, in fat shoelaces. So this goes back to my childhood in Los Angeles as a b-boy. And many of you are, I'm sure, familiar with the phrase of a b-boy or a b-girl. That is someone who is a practitioner of the hip-hop arts. Whether it be breakdancing, DJing, MCing, or doing graffiti, those are b-boys and b-girls. So I started to make b-bodhisattva. So these Buddhas were now being mixed in with that culture and mummified in these fat shoelaces. I then started to cast some in clear acrylic with Indabelly South African bracelets and Puerto Rican flags and fat gold chains and African leather medallions that were all made in Taiwan. So once again, we're sort of without origin. We're in this world of ideas and symbols that we have access to. So taking that a step further, I started to make large mandalas. And a mandala is a Buddhist diagram that usually depicts multiple deities within some type of diagrammatic field that represents the heavens. And Jung would even say that it represents the mind or the psyche. So I started to make my own versions of the mandala with 4 clear Buddhas on the outside spinning around and one that was cloaked in the center with the fat shoelaces. And this is where I started to engage with the figure. I started getting African sculptures that I would find at thrift stores or African markets, and I would start to modify them. So this particular one, which I call Eclipse, was a figure that I just bisected and put on 2 separate pedestals at different heights. And as you walk close to them, from one angle it looks like the figure in the round, but then you get to the other side and you see that hard edge. So it was also playing with this notion of being whole or being not whole, not totally complete, but also sort of the optical effect of that hard edge versus the refined and sculpted edge. And then started playing with these, thinking about them as fetish figures or power objects in an ethnographic sense. So if they are fetish objects, then why not use fetish materials on the fetish object? So I started dipping them in liquid latex and things that I'd find at sex shops. I started to make lotus blossoms. These are actually skateboard wheels that are dipped in black liquid latex, the figure in red liquid latex, and then a rope around the neck and feather boa to sort of hide the face. And then I made a much larger version. This one is approximately 27 feet tall with the canopy on top. And this was part of a solo exhibition I did called Cosmic Voodoo Circus at the Sculpture Center in New York around 5 years ago. And this is one of my assistants, Julie, standing next to it, who helped me fabricate the piece. And these were preliminary sketches for that body of work. So this is actually an etching that I did. And you know, I found this a few weeks ago when I was preparing for a show in London, and like I was saying earlier, I forgot that I even made these sketches, and then I'm making work now that totally has to do with this. So it's one of those moments, all of you creatives in the room, whether you're writers, musicians, or artists, you know, or even in the sciences, it doesn't matter. Go through your notebooks. The work sometimes you need time to understand what you were trying to do years ago. So in addition to those figures, I was also making pattern-based works and floor-based works. And all of this is echoed in the show in Detroit right now. I started making these floor pieces. This is my version of a mandala. And these are hand-carved vinyl square tiles that I would get from surplus stores. And I got them because I liked the color content. I liked that they had this washed-out look. They were usually used for institutions back in the 50s and the 60s, like, you know, high schools, junior high schools, hospitals. So I started to hand carve them and put them together as these large floors. And then, let's see if I have a close-up. I don't think I have one on me. But these figures that are around the center are 6-arm and 8-arm dancing Shiva figures. Once again, they're actually b-boys from an old breakdance poster that I had that would show how to pop lock 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Put them all through Photoshop and made them into a dancing Shiva. So I expanded that larger, and you know, this is also a nod to art history. Many of you who are familiar with the work of Carl Andre and the floor pieces that he did, which sort of challenged the viewer to either walk around it or to walk on it and create that kind of tension in a very minimalist sculpture. Taking that idea, making a large-scale floor with hand-carved tiles, I made this mandala, but to take it even further, I started taking them to breakdancing contests. We'll be doing that later if we have time, so start stretching. What I would do was take these to breakdance competitions in New York, and I would put a camera above and videotape the whole event. The dancers usually did not know they were being recorded, but afterwards I would tell them, and then when I show the floor at a museum or a gallery, I'd invite the same dancers to either come as guests, come and perform if they want, but to bring them into these galleries and museums where typically they may not go. And as some of these dance floors have traveled, some have been in Asia, some have been in Germany and the UK, I usually have certain hours during a week where anybody can come in and dance on the floors. Because going back to that idea of the ethnographic object, once people start to perform and dance on these, they start to accumulate scuff marks, and those scuff marks start to become the history of these pieces. So sometimes I show a video just like this so you can see it in action, and sometimes I don't, in a total quiet space where you have to sort of glean from those scuff marks what action might have happened. And then I started to do much larger floor pieces. This is actually colored sand poured directly on the floor, no adhesives. This is 20 feet wide by 40 feet, so it's massive. And if you sneeze, poof, it's gone. And this image is actually a reproduction of a 6th century Afghani prayer rug. And I sort of did this in response to a lot of negative portrayals of Islam that were happening in New York. This was soon after 9/11, and I thought there was other beautiful aspects that people should be aware of. That's another reason why you see it off the axis of the space, because it has to face in a perfect direction in order to actually function as a prayer rug. That's just another view of it. And I was telling someone the other day that when this was installed, there was, probably a good 200 or so people standing around it. And a friend of mine brought his young daughter. She was around 6 or 7 at the time. And she'd come during the week, so she'd seen the piece develop. But I think she freaked out when there was that many people in the room, and she bolted right across the thing. Luckily, I already took the pictures, so. Then the whole room just gasped because they were thinking I was gonna freak out, but I was like, I got pictures, I'm good. But she was so light, so fast, that she just, basically made a smudge or two along the pattern. And that moment was the moment that the audience realized that this was actually real. This was sand. It was not paint. And that there was a fragility and an ephemerality to this. And of course, once again, being a student of Buddhism, that is one of the major notions that nothing is permanent. Everything is ephemeral. So people ask me, why would you take the 200 or so hours to put this thing down when you could sweep it up in around 2 minutes? It's about the gesture. And as people remember this installation, you know how the memory works, it becomes even more grand than the actual object itself. So it's really tapping into that visceral quality between, an experience rather than an object. Now, the exact opposite of that, with probably around the same amount of labor, was this piece. And this is a glass mandala. I call this piece Lotus. And it looks like a lotus blossom, or it looks like the iris of an eye. And it's 7.5 foot diameter, solid glass, and hand etched. And that's a steel ring around it, so it weighs around 650, 700 pounds. And when you get closer, you start to realize that those petals along that lotus blossom are actually cross-sections of slave ships. Now, this is an iconic diagram that was made by slavers to show how to best pack human cargo. And later it was adopted by abolitionists in the UK who wanted to show the atrocities of slavery and the conditions that people were actually packed in. So I've sort of used this as a dichotomous object, a performative object, if you will, because when you first approach it, it's very seductive. You want to get closer and see what exactly the diagram is. The way the lights reflect off of it, it seems like almost crystal. And then you get closer, and there's that moment when you're sort of stricken with the horror of what it really represents. And to create this, we hand-carved over 6,000 figures. And then I was later commissioned by the city of New York to do a much larger version. This is around 20 feet diameter and made of steel, so approximately a ton, almost 1.5 tons of steel, on the side of a junior high school in the Bronx. And this is another piece called Blossom. Once again, I sort of call this a performative object. And what I mean by that is, let's think about the power object, the performative object, an object that does more than just, it's more than just to be looked at. What you're not getting here is that this piano actually plays. So when you walk into the room, the keys start to move, the pedals start to move, and it's playing my own rendition of the famous Billie Holiday song, Strange Fruit. And those of you who know that American standard, that song is about black bodies hanging in the southern trees. It's a strange fruit. And this piece was inspired by the Gina 6 incident in Louisiana, where in around 2007, 2008, at a high school, there was a tree where all the white students, the popular white kids, would hang out. And one day a black student wanted to sit there, so he asked permission from one of the teachers. And the teachers, of course, said, "Why you even asking me? Go sit at the tree." So the kid goes, he sits at the tree. Gradually, the white students start to leave. The next morning, when everyone gets back to school, there's nooses hanging from that tree. Now, it sounds sort of bizarre, but even when that was happening, I was in New York, and at Columbia University, on 2 teachers' doors, nooses were found hanging soon after this. So there was this little undercurrent of this almost racial poking and teasing. But what happened in Gina was this started several events that wound up around a year later when a group of black kids were going to a corner store and a group of white kids were coming out and a fight ensued. And the white kids pulled out a gun. And the black kids beat up the white kids and took the gun. And when the cops came, the black kids got arrested because they stole the gun. And once that happened, everybody descended on Gina, and there were riots, and not riots, but more protests. And you can find this; it's all history, recent history, mind you. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to do this piece. I didn't want to use a body underneath the tree, but once again, this is still the hangman's house. I find every few years I do a piece that thematically relates to lynching because there's new versions of lynching always happening. So the piano ends up being a stand-in. And the piano's song, the piano's lament, is the voice of that human. But the dichotomous meaning, once again, from this performative object, is that the Buddha finds enlightenment underneath the tree. So there is the potential for transcendence, even though there's this history. And these are just a few different views of the same piece. This is a retrofitted baby grand piano, so it's turned into a player piano. You can see the keys being depressed right there. And it's a sculpted tree. The tree is made of steel, 2-part epoxies, silk leaves, airbrushing. It was a very detailed process to create it. And continuing with the piano theme, this levitating piano is in an exhibition that I did at Mass MoCA that was called The Cartographer's Conundrum. And Mass MoCA is the largest open art space in North America. The room that I did my installation in is larger than a football field. So could you imagine having to fill that space up? Literally every time I walked in there, I felt like somebody kicked me in the gut. It was just daunting. But it was actually good preparation for MoCAD, because MoCAD is a very large space too. So I think this really was sort of training in how to deal with spaces that are on that scale. So I found church pews in the neighboring town, and I bolted some of them to the ground, and then the rest are ascending up into the heavens, as you see there. And in front of that is this levitating piano. The explosion is created by pipe organ pipes that are hung in space. And then this is sort of a larger view of the hall where this was shown. And in the beginning of the hall, another floor piece, floor patterns. Now, this is all built up to show you the visual language that has come throughout, the last 15 years or so. The patterns, the figures, the lotus, the trees, they all start to come together in a recent series of paintings that I've been doing. This is another iconic image that I sample frequently. This gentleman's name, he's reportedly named Gordon the Slave. And apparently, this is a Library of Congress image showing basically the scarification on his back from being whipped so much. And I started to look at this and once again try to find a way to transcend that history. And I started to create works, like this sort of figurative piece with bound string and twine around the back of it to create almost sacred geometry or a constellation. But then the figure keeps coming up in the recent 2-dimensional works I've been doing. So this is his, I call it a specter. This is his body right here, of course, in negative. Now, this series of works are, these series are paintings that are done on antique quilts. So I've been doing research about the Underground Railroad, and reportedly, quilts were used as signposts as escaping slaves were traveling from the south to the north, and they would come upon a safe house. If there was a quilt of a certain pattern or folded a certain way, it would signify that the house was open or under surveillance, keep moving, or go 5 miles up and make a turn, depending on the pattern that was displayed. So I started to collect antique pre-1900 quilts that typically were made by groups of women with embedded code, assuming that that story is true. So then I come in as an intervener hundreds of years later and put another layer of code. So that's when I start to draw and paint directly on the surfaces. So this is a large one right here, and you can see a tree, a bonsai. This is done with tar and glitter and oil stick, and then another figure right here, who's the negative shadow of the figure, and a patch that I made that shows that lotus image. And then all this purple is done with spray paint to create a nimbus or rays coming off of that lotus. And I'm just going to go through a few of them, and you'll see the reoccurring symbols from the previous work. This is a headless floating monk's robe. And these really are, it's difficult to work on these quilts because obviously I'm dealing with historical objects, and I vacillate between feeling that I'm, doing graffiti or destroying them or beautifying them. So it's a balancing act. I usually don't have a set plan when I work on them. It's really responding directly to the texture, the way the paint adheres to the material. If I make a mistake, there's really no way to get out of it. Sometimes I'll put new pieces of fabric on them. So they're very hands-on. This is a double lotus, just the shadows of the lotus. And, okay, so yes, one more performative object. This is also from that show, from the first slide that I showed you with the fisted comb. This is what I call the ghetto bird tunic, and this was also in that same exhibition. And I wrote text that contextualized this within the African section of the museum. So I consider this ghetto bird tunic to be a rites of passage costume. So anyone know what a ghetto bird is? Anyone know what that slang is? A ghetto bird is a police helicopter. In certain neighborhoods, I'm sure Detroit, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, down Miami, there are areas where police helicopters are on constant patrol. And as a rite of passage, young men of color have to put on this jacket, and if they can go outside and not be seen or caught or harassed by the cops, then they can actually become a man, or actually they just get to live. So, ouch. So that kind of museum, I wrote that in museum lingo, much more museum jargon and vernacular to create this. Now this is the first one I made. This is a waist length, and then I made a longer one because the longer you do it, the longer your coat gets. And this was later, this was seen as an object. In fact, I just was at an opening last night in Philadelphia where this piece is being shown. It's a show called The Freedom Principle. And it's, the theme of that show is the avant-garde art and music exchange in Chicago with the artists ensemble of Chicago and various avant-garde troupes there. So this later, I made this piece around 10 years ago, but years after, I started to use it for performance. And here it is in a performance with one of my mentors, the great Terry Adkins, musician and sculptor, wearing the coat. This is the poet Saul Williams wearing the coat. Once again, Terry Adkins in another concert wearing it. So around 4 or 5 different people have made it, and now when it goes through an exhibition, the idea is that it actually has that power in it. It has the essence and the remnant and the patina of the people who've used it. Now, I use that as a bridge to talk about performance. So I will repurpose and remix my own pieces. I do this all the time. Curators hate it. But you know, sometimes you got to do it. This is the same female figure that you saw before, the 25-foot tall one. Now, this is her at a party that was at the Roseland Ballroom in New York City, which is a legendary concert space that has now closed. So there's a bit of music history with this venue. And for the closing show, I was commissioned to do the artistic design. The DJ was Questlove from The Roots or the Jimmy Fallon Show. And the entertainment was Santi Gold. And I don't know if you are familiar with Santi Gold. You should get her here on to do a performance. She's incredible. But I also designed she and her dancers' costumes, which are based off of this large pagan monument. So this is them backstage. And then this is the venue when it was in full effect. And the figure is over here somewhere. Oh, right? Yeah, there you go. So it felt like you were in some crazy pagan ceremony. Now, that's all performance to lead up to me showing you a clip of the performance of my group, Moon Medicin. And we just performed last Friday at MOCAD. And I'm just going to show you a quick clip of us performing at Lincoln Center around 2 years ago. Now, the video I showed you in the beginning, we take that kind of video approach to create visuals for the band. We also wear costumes, we wear masks, and we also interject lots of highly charged political content in those videos, even in the songs that we choose to perform. But here's an example. I'm responsible for costumes, video, and all piano, synthesizer, keyboard stuff, and I choose the music, and I pick the band.
Dance, sucker. Dance, sucker. Meet me on the equinox while we dance. So much blue, so much beauty, so much used and misused and abused. So we dance. You the type to make slaves, and we the type to free them. We dance. Changing faces every night, we call them how we see them. So we dance. Dance, sucker. We dance on the equinox. Yes, we dance. You ain't never had to suffer. You ain't felt that strain. Daddy bought your life, it came with your last name. Yet you partying and drinking, trying to kill the pain. So you dance, sucker. The rhythm is living. Yes, we dance. Some dance for chicken. Dance, bitches. Always dance. And quit expecting me to jump every time your fingers snap. What's elevated to your ranks is really just a trap. Nah, baby, we ain't had to go to school to learn that. We bought into the pipe dream, now we want our money back. So we dance. So. Open up your mind and turn your opinion off. And dance softly.
So this is the audience last Friday when we finally took the stage, and as an experiment and a way that I would love to proceed with this project, we performed in the installation. So as opposed to performing in another room on a stage, we actually integrated the installation as the backdrop for the show. And the members of my group are DJ Jahi Sundance, who is known to perform with Robert Glasper and Michelle Ndegeocello cello. Martin Luther is the lead guitarist and vocalist, who used to be part of The Roots and was in the last Julie Taymor film. Swiss Chris, former musical director for the Black Eyed Peas. My bassist is Andre Simone, who is Prince's original bass player. And best friend, childhood friend. I've bought him out of retirement, and he's part of the group, which is, an honor. And myself on keyboards, and Mark Hines, who does a little bit of everything. He does a lot of the technical stuff, the computer programming, some of the video editing, and pitches in on bass when necessary. But as you can see, we do a version of the Prince song Controversy, but instead of singing his lyrics, we sing the Black National Anthem, which a lot of people don't know, and a lot of people don't realize there actually is a Black National Anthem that was made in 1904. And so to help that, we do a little karaoke-style lyrics on the top. And whatever is happening in current news the night before, the day of, we will put that into the mix. This was the day after the Walter Scott killing was videotaped. We had that on the screen. And there's Bob Ross. Give it up for Bob Ross. Okay. So I'm just going to show you some quick images. This is very, very, very recent work. I opened a solo exhibition in London 2 weeks ago, and then opened the Detroit show last week. And this week, I actually got some pictures to show you of both. So this is the outside of the exhibition in London. It's called Hither and Yon. And this piece right here is called Woke. And the materials are hand-carved figurative sculptures at the bottom. I've carved 5 different sculptures, covered them in tar and glitter. And the shadow and the wall piece are all done with a double-colored sequin material. So the actual drawing is me flipping each of the sequins over to show the reverse side, which is silver. So you have black and silver to create the portraits. In the space are several of the quilt paintings. And some recent bronze figures, which is a new series of sculptures, and I'll show you an example of how those are made. A lot of the figures that are in these quilts are derived from the sculptures that I've been making, the figurative sculptures. And these figures, I call the series BAM, and this is how they're actually created. So what I do, as I told you, I've been collecting these African wooden figures for years, and now what I've done is started to dip them in a thick brown wax, so they're less recognizable, less discernible, more abstracted, and easier to disregard. There's no real personal traits on them now. And then I take those wax-covered figures to a shooting range and sculpt them with different caliber weapons. So 22, 12-gauge shotguns, 9mm pistols, you name it, handguns, a whole plethora, because each one leaves a different mark. It's pretty morbid. I personally don't pull the trigger just because the mojo is just too strong there. My DP, my director of photography, actually pulls the trigger. And up to date, we've probably done around 8 different figures. But once they are shot, I take the remnants and I cast them in bronze. So these are the bronze figures afterwards. And they show all the marks of their creation. These 3 are in the show in London. Now, the names of each of them are representative of names of victims of police violence over the last 5 years or so. So the male figure that you just saw was for Michael Brown. These 3 for Walter Scott, who I just mentioned that was in that previous video behind the band. For Tanisha, which is Tanisha Anderson, who died while being physically restrained by the cops in Cleveland, 2014. And for Yvette, who was killed in Los Angeles after being kicked in the pelvis and the stomach by a police officer, and she died on the way to the station. Part of evoking the names, even saying them right now, is in its own way a bit of a memorial. In an adjacent room, I have the videos of each of those figures, and the way it's set up are 3 different monitors, and they're all going at different times, so you're constantly moving around to catch where the action is coming from. And then these are the last few images, which are from the show in Detroit. And it was a very different approach to Detroit. As Alicia mentioned, it was much more of a complicated installation, a risk-taking installation. All the works here are new concepts, new ideas, new approaches to even creating the work. And to walk into the space, you have to walk over this billboard on the ground. You actually literally have to step on it. And this is what the billboard says. Just us, or justice. And you have to step over justice to enter the space. And once in, there's this piece right here, which is called Sleeping Giant. And once again, this is derived from one of those figures, one of the BAM figures that I just showed you. And this one is made with a metal armature, and all the material and objects that create the skin of the figure are found objects that were found over around 2-week, 3-week period in Detroit, driving around, dumpster diving, and so on. This piece in the far corner was created on the spot. A lot of the work there really was created during the performance, too. So after Moon Medicin performed, we retired the costumes that we'd been wearing for the last year and a half, hung them on a rack there, and now they're an artwork. So the masks and the costumes are hanging from that. In the back is a figure called Lao Quan. This is a bigger image of it. And I mean, I have no idea generationally what's happening in this room, but if anyone recalls, there was a figure called Fat Albert, who was a very famous sort of moralistic animated cartoon on Saturday mornings that was created by Bill Cosby. And obviously a lot has happened since then. This piece, what you can't get from the picture, is that it's actually, right now it's probably 3/4 of the way full of air. But throughout the show, it's losing air and then getting pumped up again. So it's like a very elongated last breath. And the name Lao Quan refers to a famous sculpture that is now in Rome that depicts Lao Quan, who was the priest who warned the Romans of the Trojan horse. Now, the priest was then punished by Athena because Athena protects the Greeks. So she punished him by killing him and his sons. At least that's one story. There's another story that said he was punished by Poseidon because as a priest he was sworn to celibacy but was found fornicating with his wife. What was interesting about the Laocoon figure, and you can look this figure up because there's been debates and stories about this figure and interpretations for hundreds of years. Once again, history is malleable. And with all the conflated ideas that go into this piece, part Bill Cosby, part Fat Albert, part Black Lives Matter, part the killing, police killings, and so on. This is something that will be interpreted in many ways by many people. It is not meant to be a happy piece. It's not, there is a dark humor to it, but there is a morbidity behind it as well. Ultimately, it's sort of more powerful than me to describe. Once you see it, you can make your own assumptions and conclusions. A partner piece to that, which is very small, minuscule, is this origami Trojan horse that's in the corner of the exhibition. You almost have to walk around to find it. And this piece was made literally in the last 2 days of the show, because as I was making my way from where I was staying to the museum, I kept running by these huge spools. So I wanted to make another found object work. So me and the group rolled that thing all the way 3 or 4, probably 5 or 6 blocks to get to the museum, and then put it in the space. We videotaped it and used part of that videotape in our performance. So a lot of the work is generative in the sense that its creation renders it as an art object, but its creation also is an artistic process that becomes a piece itself. And this is just a last image of us in the space performing last Friday night. And that's all my images for you tonight. Hopefully people have some questions, and we can do that in the room next door. Thank you.